There we go. Okay. So my name is Ben Zillow. I work at Jobber, which is a local company, local startup that works using Rails. So our main product is written in Rails. Increasingly moving to new technologies and new areas, but the core of the product still sits in Rails. And what I'm going to be doing today is just talking about on like a brand new Rails project. So you just create a brand new Rails project, and you have to do the classic thing that we pretty much always have to do is like, oh, I need users and I need to be able to log in. So I'm actually going to take a Rails project basically from scratch, and then through that, in particular, setting it up using OmniAuth and OAuth. So it's actually going to show. Twitter is some of the best docs on OAuth for whatever reason. So if you're looking to learn about OAuth, it's one of the better places to go to just kind of like learn about OAuth in general. So OAuth, how many people know what OAuth is or have heard about it before? Okay, so you're familiar with it. And basically the idea is that back kind of like in the early 2000s, we started doing more of these API things, and people need to like somehow authorize one application to talk to another application as them. And the way this was typically being done is like if my app needs to go talk to GitHub, I'd go into this app and I'd have to give it my GitHub credentials. So this app would know all my GitHub credentials, or would know all my Twitter and like Facebook and all these different things. And then that app would get hacked, and all these people's credentials would get stolen, and it was kind of a nightmare. So OAuth came out of looking for a solution to that problem, saying like, we want to stop people giving all these third parties their credentials, and how can we do that? And the idea is basically this kind of like three-legged flow here, where you have your product, which would be the one on the left here, and they can go and say like, I want to auth this against GitHub, get kicked over to GitHub site, and all the actual like credentials and everything happens inside GitHub. And then in exchange, they'll give you a token that says like, we validate that this token means you can access this person's data. And your own app, the third party, never need to see what those credentials actually are. One of the problems with OAuth is it's a fairly loose spec. In particular, the original OAuth spec, there's OAuth 2 now, which is better, but you still see a lot of variance in terms of how it's implemented in the wild. So even if you've done it before, you're going to go and try and do it for someone new, and the way it works is going to be different. You're going to have to figure things out again. It's going to be frustrating again. So in Ruby, there's a really good library called OmniAuth, which kind of abstracts it all away for you. And basically, other people have written gems for each of the different what they call providers. So like Twitter would be a provider, Facebook would be a provider, GitHub would be a provider. And once you've implemented OmniAuth, it's really easy to drop any of those in, and we'll see that a bit later in the talk. So there's a few things that I kind of want everyone to come out of this talk believing. So one is that OAuth can be really intimidating, but OmniAuth can really help reduce the complexity of having to build that into your app. With OmniAuth adding additional forms, so like if you added GitHub, it's like, oh, I want people to be able to log in with Twitter as well. It's really quick and easy to add that additionally. Usually when people are going to build these user systems, they end up using an existing library that's out there. One of the really popular ones is Devise, which will actually give you your sign-up forms and your login forms and all this kind of stuff. It will handle, auto logout, and it will handle password reset flows and all that kind of complexity. Devise is actually built on top of Warden. Warden actually does all the kind of stuff in the model layer, Devises, controllers, and views, but they're both really heavy, and they like bring along a lot of their own opinions. They're difficult to customize. And a lot of the time you don't actually need that, especially if you use OAuth. Because the really cool thing with OAuth is that you don't have to deal with things like password resets and all those types of problems, because you don't actually own the account. The account's off in GitHub somewhere. So all the problems of like dealing with the account and users changing things and needing to reset their passwords, all that kind of stuff, can be GitHub's problem, and you don't have to deal with it. So we'll see how much simpler that can make our app, and then because of that, how much more feasible it is to just build our own little user system, our own little authentication system, instead of using something really big from one of these libraries. So with that, I'm just gonna dive into it. I think this is, there we go. Okay, so I have this Rails app. And this is just a 4.2.5 Rails app, just using Rails new dot. built that way. So this is basically what you get as vanilla Rails app. The only thing that I've added is just some pages, so we have something to kind of work with. So I've added a pages controller, and it has a home page and a private page. Did I stop my other server? No, I didn't. So if we go look at what we have, this is my home page. If anyone's like messed around with the scaffolded generators in Rails, you're probably familiar with this. This is just the default content it places on that page. And then I have, yeah, it's because, there we go. So this one I've added a little bit to. So our premise here is that I'm creating a site where I'm going to host all my conspiracy theories. So everything that I've figured out that the government's doing. But I don't want anyone to be able to come and see this because I don't want the government or the FBI or anything find out about me. So we need to protect this. And right now this is open to the world. Anyone can go to this URL and see this. So our goal here is going to be like adding some protection against this so that the feds can't get at me. So that's all we have in the app right now. And of course, now what we need to do is actually figure out how do we protect that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the OmniAuth gem. So in Rails, if we want to add a gem, usually the best way to go about it is we go to our gem file, which is just kind of this manifest of everything in our app. And we're just going to go gem, well, I'll comment. Gem, oh, come on. There we go. OmniAuth. And then I'm also just going to go and update, I prefer pry to bybug, so I'm going to do that. And then go run our bundle install. So I was going to go, in this case I already had it locally, but otherwise we would go and like download that and install it for us. So that adds OmniAuth to our application. And then what we're going to need to add is something called a session controller. So usually most of our terminology in Rails, if you have something that's kind of about persisting across multiple requests, we call that the session. So if you want a user to be able to log in and stay logged in for multiple requests, it's going to have to do something around a session. So we're going to use the Rails controller generator. So go Rails generate controller session, and then we're going to give it the actions we want. So we want to have create action and destroy action. So if I run that, Rails will go off and do some magic for me. It's going to create a bunch of files. So one of those is going to be my controller file. So we can go look at the session controller file. It's going to create views, which I will actually end up needing eventually. It's also going to add them to my routes. So routes, we can see added session create and session destroy. So we now have the session controller, which like we could actually just go hit because of Rails conventions. It's going to be at session/create, I believe. Maybe not, session create. There we go. Yeah, it should be. Maybe I didn't do something in the generator syntax, but by default just creates as a get. Anyway, so now we have a session controller. And now the magic's really going to start to happen when we start connecting OmniAuth to the session controller. So OmniAuth, when we add a provider, oh yeah, I need to do that as well. So it's going to be config.middleware. And then this is where I'm going to need to cheat and look at my notes. Middleware use. .use. So this just sets up my application, so it's going to use OmniAuth as something called middleware, so it's going to kind of inject itself into my web stack. And then I create what's called a provider. So again, in OmniAuth terminology, a provider is whatever I'm using for auth. So it could be like GitHub, it could be Twitter, it could be Facebook. Out of the box, they give you something called developer, which is kind of this one just to get you going. It's really easy to work with, and we'll see what that looks like in a sec. And then the other thing I'm going to need to do in my routes is set up, instead of these paths, I need to set up my session controller so it's going to be at the right paths that OmniAuth wants to use. So one is that OmniAuth, to use that, so OmniAuth/developer So for each provider, it creates a path for you at auth / whatever the provider's name is. So because we're using developer, it's going to be auth / developer. And then when it goes off and does its magic, when it comes back, where it wants to go to is auth / the provider's name / callback. And we want that to go to my session create action. And then the other trick that I'm going to do here is that depending on the provider, some of them come back with a get, some of them come back with a post. So I'm going to tell this that it can accept either a get or a post. So now what should happen in theory is if we go to my home page, I can add a link. Login, sign up, and we're going to go to developer auth. That. And I think, I need to restart my server because I did a bundle install. So there's a few things that you still need to restart your server for. One of them is if you install new gems. So now if we go here, there's our link. And if we click that, we get to this page. So we didn't have to build this. OmniAuth just gave this to us for free. And as you can see, it's like a super secure form of authentication, given that there's not even a password field. But then we can hit sign in. And, oh yes, this thing. So this is what I was talking about before that I knew I was going to hit. Because that form doesn't have like the Rails CSRF token, so Rails is this thing to try and secure someone else from attacking your site by just hitting it with form submissions. So each form it injects this token into and it checks that that token exists. And because we're coming from OmniAuth, that doesn't exist. So again, if I go and cheat in my notes, I have the little snippet. There we go, skip before filter. So in our sessions controller, we just need to tell it not to do that on our sessions controller. Actually, we can do only create. So now if we try this again, there, we ended up on our session create. And now if we go look in here, what OmniAuth does is it sticks that data into our request. So in here, it's going to have our data. So I'm just going to put a, puts in here to dump that out so we can see what we're getting. So if I go back through that flow, and we go look in our server logs, we can see right here is it dumping out what we got. So we can see that it passed this object that has some information on it. It's got a provider name, so developer, which is the type of provider we're using. It's got a UID, so each provider will give you some form of unique identifier. In the case of the developer one, it's just an email. From another system, it might be the user ID number or hash or something like that. And then it gives me this other thing called info, which has some other stuff on it, like the email and name. And the info is independent for each one. So any given provider you have might give you different types of information on that, like info thing that's embedded in there. So that's what it's giving to us. But of course, at this point, we're not really doing much with it. So we get this information back from OmniAuth, and it's like, okay, great, thanks. And then we just ignore it. So we need to figure out a way to actually do something with that. And usually the answer for that is we actually want to create a representation of a user in our system. We want to create a user model. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to use another generator to create my user, and I can tell it right in the generator what fields I want to have. So I want to have a unique ID. I want to keep track of which provider it came from, and I want it to have a name. So I'll hit that. That's going to go off and create all the files that I need for that. One of the things that's going to create is a database migration, so I'm going to have to run that. So that'll run that against our database and create our users table for us. If we go into our Rails console, we can see we don't have any users yet, but that user model is there, and we can try and fetch from it. And now what we're going to do is we're actually inside of this create action where we're getting that information back from OmniAuth. We're going to try and use it. So Rails has this great method which is called find or create by, which is going to be really handy for us here, where we don't know if that user has already tried to log into our system before. They might be new, they might not be. And what this lets us do is basically say, here's some attributes. If a user exists with them, return it to me. If it doesn't, create a new one. So the attributes that we're going to give it are the provider, auth hash, provider, and we're going to give it the UID. And then the one other neat thing that this method does is I can pass it this block, and it will run that block against new ones. So if it doesn't find it and is creating a new one, we can tell it what we want to do with new ones. In this case, I'm going to get to set the name, and we're going to pull the name out of that info object that I was showing you earlier, which will give us a name. So that's going to get us a user object, assuming that we don't have... Was that what am I saying? Thank you. That made things happier. Okay, so now we have this user object, and again we talked about session. So Rails will magically give us a session, and I'm trying to remember what the default implementation is, if it's cookie based or if it actually stores the data. Anyways, Rails will give us something, this hash called session, which we can store things on and will persist across requests. So we can use it to keep track of the user's ID. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to redirect to our private page. Redirect to private page. Oh, page is private is going to be semantically where Rails calls that. And then in theory, now we should be able to go through our flow again. So let's go through the full thing. So we can go log in, sign up. We can give it my information, click sign in, and there we go. It took us to our private page. So we're signed in now. And if we go and look in our Rails console now, there should be a user there. And sure enough, there is. And it's got the email that we gave it. It's got our developer provider on it. It's got our name. So that all worked great, which is awesome. Now if we let people log in, probably the next thing we should do is let them log out. So in this destroy action, I'm going to call something called reset session, which does basically what it sounds like. It's going to clear everything out there. And then after people have logged out, I'm going to redirect them back to the root. And then the one I still have, no. Nicety I'm going to go in is I'm going to go get session destroy as logout. So I'm going to call that path logout just to make it a little bit more convenient. And then if we go to our private page, we can now add a logout link, which is going to look a lot like our login link. Oh, below all that text, which it doesn't. There we go. Okay. At this resolution, it doesn't want to show us all that text. That's okay. Link to logout. Okay, and now let's see. So there we go. So at this point, we can go and we can log in. It'll take us to a private page. We can log out. So we're done, right? So we're good? Does anyone see anything wrong with what we've built here? See any issues?
Anyone can log in and see your private page?
Well, that's one of them. The other one is that it doesn't actually matter whether you're logged in or not. So I can still go here. So I'm not logged in, I've logged out, but there's nothing stopping me from being able to hit this page. So usually when we're building this type of system, there's two different terms that sound like the same thing but mean slightly different things. And one is authentication, and the other is authorization. So what we've built here is authentication, this thing where I can kind of like tell it who I am, and it goes, okay, you're this person. But we haven't built anything to say, okay, you're this person, what are you actually allowed to do? Or if you're not that person, what are you not allowed to do? And that's the authorization side of it. And that's where like often we'll go to these like very heavy other libraries that will pull in that will do that for us. But here we're just going to build our own, and it really isn't that hard. So if we go back to look at what we did in our session controller, we stored the user's ID on the session. So we have that information when a user's logged in. So now there's just a few things that we're going to do with that. So we can use this keyword helper method. And what we're going to do is we're going to create two methods, one called current user and one called logged in. And what a helper method does is it means that I can use those methods throughout the application. So I can use them in other controllers, and I could use them in views. So if in any of my views I want to be able to check that or know something about the user, I can do that. And then for current user, we're going to take advantage of the fact that we have that in the session ID. So we're going to go current user is equal to user.find session user ID. And we only want to do that if we have a user ID in our session. So if someone is logged in. And then we're going to write a method called logged in so we can check if people are logged in. And all that's going to do is just check if I have a current user or not. Yeah?
It's supposed to be UID and user ID?
No. The user ID is actually our user ID. So the ID of the user in our database, whereas the UID is whatever identifier the third party uses. Yeah. So these give us two little helper methods here, and then I'm going to write one other method that I'm going to call ensure logged in. So this is going to be a method that I can call to basically check if a user is logged in. Redirect to root unless logged in. So if I call this and someone isn't logged in, it's going to kick them back to that home page. And now what we can do with that is go back into our pages controller, and we're going to go before filter. So this allows us to say call this method before each request. Ensure logged in, but of course we don't want to do that on the home page. We only want to do it if someone tries to view our private page. Okay, so in theory, with that all there now, we should be able to sign in still, see our page, we should be able to sign out. And if we try and go to our page, we get kicked back to here. So now you have to at least have told me who you are in order to get into the site. But of course, the next trick is that anyone can tell me they are basically whoever they want to be, and I wouldn't know if they're lying or not. So what we're going to do is instead of having to build our own sign-up flows and all that type of stuff, we're just going to implement the GitHub login flow, and we're going to make the assumption that anyone who has a GitHub account must be cool. Because they're a developer or something. So we'll let them into our site. So this is really where the magic of OmniAuth comes to play. Like right now we have this kind of like goofy page where it's like, yeah, okay, give me a name and an email. And that's not really that useful. But what's so cool is that now I can just go, okay, I'm going to use GitHub. So I need to install the GitHub provider. So again, each of those providers will have their own gems. Usually it's OmniAuth, Twitter, Facebook, whatever. You can find those all on GitHub. I'm going to have to do a bundle install. So that does a bundle install and installs that for me. And then there's just a few other things that I need to change. So one is that we set up in our application RB earlier, we said provider developer. So now I'm going to add another one. I'm going to go GitHub. I'm going to make this one only available in development. So it'll be safe in production. And then GitHub's actually super easy to work with as well. I might even still have it open. Nope. So in GitHub, where you're going to want to go if you want to set this up is you go to your settings and you go to applications, developer applications, and then you can just create a new one. So I'm going to go YAGRB, OmniAuth, demo. We have to give it a homepage URL, so we'll just give it where we're running from. And then we have to give it the callback. So this is where GitHub's going to hit back to our application after it's done its thing. And this is what we had to set up earlier in our routes, where it's auth / the provider's name / callback. we can go register. And just like that, it's going to give us our client ID and our client secret. So these are kind of like your secret information. You wouldn't want to share these anywhere. If you're working on a project, make sure you're not committing them into a public repo or anything like that. Because if anyone has those two pieces of information, they can access all the data that your application could access against GitHub. So for the GitHub provider, I give it the client ID, and then I give it the client secret. And then we need to add GitHub as the login page. So again, it's just going to be auth / the provider's name. We'll call this GitHub auth. And then we can go to our home page. And instead of using developer auth, we're going to switch this to use GitHub auth. Okay, now again, I've installed a gem, so I need to restart my server. So I restart my server. And now if I can find my app. Okay, so now just like before we had this link, but now when I click on that, I end up on GitHub's OAuth page. And that just happened magically through OmniAuth. And it kind of tells me what it's going to do. So I'm going to be giving it access to access my public data, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. And here's the application's name. And I can just go authorize application. And then bam, I'm logged in. So just with those basically like 3 changes, we were able to change it from that goofy thing where now we have GitHub OAuth implemented in our application so people can log in using GitHub. And then if we went and looked, again in our Rails console, we'll have created a new user for me. Ugh, that's ugly. If I do this. So as we can see, I have the old one that I was getting with the developer provider, and then there's a new one. So you can see the UUID from GitHub. It looks like they gave me like a string. It's probably my user ID in GitHub. They gave us my name, and then the provider. Also, I maybe would have given email. I'm not sure if GitHub gives that in their OAuth implementation or not. But that's basically all you have to do. And then similarly, if you want to add a different one, it's like, oh, I want people to log in with Twitter. You can just add the Twitter provider, and it would just magically work. You'd be off to the races. So that's basically what I want to show. Is just like from basically a complete vanilla Rails application, how little work it took to build in like GitHub authorization. Like we didn't need to add, other than the OmniAuth, we didn't add any new libraries. That's all we needed. We built our own user model. We built our own session controller, and it really wasn't that hard. Any questions? No?
What if someone forgets which OAuth provider they logged in with? Do you have any recommendations for?
Sure, yeah, that's a good question. So one of the things that, again, I'm not sure if GitHub does, and actually we can check that. Let me clean this up a bit. Controllers. Let's take a look at what GitHub gives us when we go through that flow. One of the things that a lot of products will do is use the email as the unique identifier. And the advantage of that is whichever flow they come through. Here we go. Let's take a look at our auth hash. So it gives us all kinds of information, like my website, where I am, but it's not giving us the email. And it's possible that I could change something in the authentication to get the email. I'm not sure. There's actually a really funny story where Travis CI, when they were first opening up their their beta for private applications, so initially they only worked on public ones, and they did the sign up through GitHub for their beta. All these people signed up for the beta, And it was like a month later that they realized that they hadn't gotten any emails for all these users who had signed up for their beta, so they had no way to contact them. So they had to like put out this news thing going like, if you signed up, like please sign up again so we can get your email. So with GitHub, you might not be able to do that, get the email. But with a lot of them, you can. And then all you do is you change it so it's like find or create by, it would probably be email, auth hash, and it would probably be in the info email, something like that. Or you might need to do a little bit of work to normalize the data that you're getting from the different providers to pull out email. That's a pretty good solution, and it falls out pretty nicely because whatever system, like I do that with some of our products where sometimes I log in with a password and sometimes I log in with like Google Apps OAuth, and I still end up in the same account. So that's probably the best answer.
Yeah, I've done that before too, and it seems a little bit messy.
Yeah.
But good to know that you're doing a good job or two.
Yeah, it's not great, like, and especially like with GitHub too. If I don't have their email, it's not even like they could go search their email inbox to check an email that I sent them telling them. It's kind of hopefully they remember. Like one thing is that on the user side, they can like in GitHub, you can see all the applications you've authorized. So like you could tell them to go look and see if they used, GitHub. Probably be easier just to try logging in with GitHub and seeing if it worked or not. Yeah. Actually, good people to answer that would be the login radius guys, because that's kind of what they do. I don't know how much they do between synchronizing from different providers, how much they try and do that or not. So yeah, I don't think there's any like magical answer for that.
If you were to do a non-demo app, you probably wouldn't roll your own session and authorization. What would you use instead? Or would you roll your own?
I probably would. Unless you're planning on letting people sign up directly, it's probably going to be more work fighting against whatever system. Like trying to get like OAuth to work with Devise is a pain in the butt. It's a lot easier to write your own than to get Devise working properly with OmniAuth. Like that, my standard answer is like Devise or Warden that I go to when I do need a system like that. I like Warden better because Devise is really tough to customize the views and controllers. Warden it's just fully model logic, so it's easier to change what the actual user experience looks like, and you just get the magic around managing the users. And like the session controller is just it's really easy, really. Like there's not a lot going on.
The authorization side, would you roll your own for that?
It depends on what you need. Another part of kind of these types of systems, so there's like authentication and there's authorization, and then there's like access control. And access control is where like you want certain users to have the abilities to do certain things on certain types of objects. And my favorite library for that by quite a ways is a one called CanCan. CanCan.ro. I wonder what that is. Which is by a guy named Ryan Bates. So he's the guy who did Railscast. I don't know if he's still doing Railscast or not. But he wrote this library, and I just really like the way the syntax falls out, where this is kind of like what you keep on asking, like if, can, verb, noun. And you can just kind of like extend that across the application and use that in all kinds of places. And it's really extensible. There's a lot of flexibility in it. It does authorization as well. So CanCan's my default answer on that side.
Can is an updated version of Can.
Okay, can.
Ryan Bates doesn't do Railscast, and he also doesn't keep Can updated.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this looks pretty active. 4 days. Look at that, stars. That's a lot of stars. Must be good. Continuation of the dead can. Okay, that's good to know. So this is what you should be using. So ignore what I said. Do what he said.
It's the same good stuff.
It looks like it's got like pretty same API. Yeah, there you go. That's the exact same example. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay, cool. Well,